PEGI 3. PEGI 7. PEGI 12. PEGI 16. PEGI 18.
Now, I know there are millions of young people out there who are playing video games to while away the hours while they're confined inside. There's been one question on your mind, and I'm the man that can answer it. Yes, I am the voice that says PEGI 18 on all your video games. So the next time you hear PEGI 18, just spare a thought for this old geezer locked up in his recording studio for who knows how long.
In the 20s and subsequent 30s, it was the ambition of every literary-minded young man to be invited to one of Virginia Woolf's Sunday morning soirees. These were invariably held at her home, number 52 Tavistock Square, at which I was a frequent visitor, for I was related to the Woolf family through some Alsatian cousins. The door of number 52 was invariably opened by the maid, George, a friend of Lytton Strachey's. I can see that room now, full of talk and smoke and people, and what extraordinary people there were. Auden was there, Spender, Isherwood, the old faithfuls and the young hopefuls, and always there was someone one never quite expected to see. I remember seeing A.E. Houseman there once, lured down from Cambridge by Dady Rylands and the prospect of all-in wrestling at Finsbury Park. And there, in the corner, talking to Leonard and Virginia, were the Berlins, Irving and Isaiah. And then there was Virginia herself, elegant and quizzical, the sunlight playing on that long, pale face. She would be speaking of her contemporaries, how she'd spoken last week to Hemingway, how Ernest had said, "When I reach for my gun, I hear the word culture." How easy it was for them, she thought, and how difficult for her. Some of her work, you see, frankly disappointed, vitiated by her intense feminism. Virginia was never a suffragette, but she subscribed to the theory that the pen was mightier than the sword, and I once saw Evelyn Waugh reel under a savage blow from her Parker 51. But of all the honours that fell on Virginia's head, none, I think, pleased her more than the Evening Standard Award for the tallest woman writer of 1926, an award she took by a short neck from Edith Sitwell. And she was, in a very real sense, the tallest woman writer I've ever known, which is not to say that her stories were tall. They were not. They were short. But she did stand head and shoulders above her contemporaries. Dylan Thomas, for example, a man of great literary stature, only came up to her waist. And sometimes, not even there. But if I think of Virginia now, it is as she was when I last saw her outside the changing rooms at the London Library. Impulsively, perhaps, I went up to her. It's Mrs. Woolf, isn't it?" "Is it?" she said, and looked at me out of those deep, limpid eyes. "Is it? I often wonder." And she wandered away.
Ever since I could remember, the dunny man had come running down the driveway once a week. From inside the house we could hear his running footsteps. Then we could hear the rattle and thump as he lifted the lavatory, took out the full pan, clipped on a special lid, and set down an empty pan in its place. After more rattling and banging, there was an audible intake of breath as he hefted the full pan onto his shoulder. Then the footsteps went back along the driveway, slower this time, but still running. From outside in the street, there was rattling, banging, and shouting as the full pan was loaded onto the dunny cart with all the other full pans. I often watched the dunny cart from the front window. As it slowly made its noisome way along the street, the dunny men ran to and from it with awesome expertise. They wore shorts, sand shoes, and nothing else except a suntan, suspiciously deep on the forearms. Such occasional glimpses were all one was allowed by one's parents, and all that was encouraged, even by the dunnymen themselves. They preferred to work in no other company but their own. They were a band apart. Years went by without those running footsteps being acknowledged by any other means except a bottle of beer left standing in the lavatory on the closest visiting day to Christmas Day. Otherwise, it seemed generally agreed that the lavatory pan was changed by magic. From day to day it got fuller and fuller, generating maggots by about the third day. To combat the smell, honeysuckle was grown on a trellis outside the lavatory door, in the same way that the European nobility had recourse to perfume when they travelled by galley. The maggots came from blowflies, and more blowflies came from the maggots. Blowflies were called blowies. The Australian climate, especially on the eastern seaboard in the latitude of Sydney, was specially designed to accommodate them. The blowies' idea of a good time was to hang around the dunny waiting for the seat to be lifted. They were then faced with the challenge of getting through the hole before it was blocked by the descending behind of the prospective occupant. There was no time for any fancy flying. Whether parked on the wall or stacking around in a holding pattern near the ceiling, every blowy was geared up to make either a vertical dive from high altitude or a death-defying low-level run through the rapidly decreasing airspace between the seat and your descending rear. The moment the seat came up, it was Pearl Harbor. Once inside, enclosed under a dark sky, the blowies set about dumping their eggs. The memory of the results has always in my mind given extra vividness to Shakespeare's line about life in excrements. God knows what would have happened if ever the dunny men went on strike. Even as things were, by the end of the week, the contents of the pan would be getting too close for comfort. Luckily, the dunny man was a model of probity. Never putting a foot wrong, he carried out his Sisyphean task in silent loyalty. Only when he was about to leave our lives forever did his concentration slip. Perhaps he foresaw that one day the sewer would come to everywhere in the world. Perhaps, in order to ward off these grim thoughts, he partook of his Christmas beer while still engaged in the task. Because it was on that day, the day before Christmas Eve, that the dunny man made his solitary mistake. My mother and I were having breakfast. I heard the dunny man's footsteps thumping along the driveway with a silent pause as he hurdled my bicycle, which, in my habitual carelessness, I had left lying there. I heard the usual thumps, bangs and heaves. I could picture the brimming pan, secured with the special clipped lid, hoisted high on his shoulder while he held my mother's gift bottle of beer in his other appreciative hand. Then the footsteps started running back the other way. Whether he forgot about my bicycle or simply mistimed his jump, there was no way of telling. Suddenly, there was the noise of, well, it was mainly the noise of a dunny man running full tilt into bicycle. The uproar was made especially ominous by the additional noise, tiny but significant in context, of a clipped lid springing off. While my mother sat there with her hands over her eyes, I raced out through the fly-screen door and took a look down the driveway. The dunny man, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his tragedy, had not yet risen to his feet. Needless to say, the contents of the pan had been fully divulged. All the stuff had come out. But what was really remarkable was how none of it had missed him. Already you could hear a gravid hum in the air. Millions of flies were on their way towards us. They were coming from all over Australia. For them, it was a durbar, a moot, a gathering of the clans. For us, it was the end of an era. There's a famous seaside town called Blackpool that's noted for fresh air and fun. and Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom went there with Albert, their son. A grand little lad was young Albert, all dressed in his best, quite a swell, with a stick with an horse's head handle, the finest that Woolworths could sell. And they didn't think much to the ocean. The waves, there was fiddling and small, no wrecks, nobody drowned, in fact nothing to laugh at all. So, seeking for further amusement, they paid and went into the zoo, where there's lions and tigers and camels, and old ale and sandwiches too. There was one great big lion called Wallace, whose nose were all covered with scars, and he lay in a somnolent posture, with the side of his face against the bars. Now Albert had heard about lions, how they was ferocious and wild, and to see Wallace lying so peaceful, well, it didn't seem right to the child. So straightway the brave little fella, not showing a morsel of fear, took his stick with the horse's head handle and poked it in Wallace's ear. You could see that lion didn't like it, for given a kind of a roll, he pulled Albert inside cage with him and swallowed the little lad whole. Now Pa, who had seen the occurrence and didn't know what to do next, said, "Ma, yon lion's et Albert." And Ma said, "Well, I am vexed." So Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom, quite rightly, when all said and done, complained to the animal keeper that the lion had eaten their son. The keeper was quite nice about it. He said, "What a nasty mishap. Are you sure it's your lad he's eaten?" Pa said, "Am I sure? There's his cap." The manager had to be sent for. He came and he said, "What's to do?" Pa said, "Yon lion's et Albert, and him in his Sunday clothes too." Ma said, "Right's right, young feller. I think it's a shame and a sin for yon lion to go and eat Albert, and after we've paid to come in." The manager wanted no trouble. He took out his purse right away and said, "How much to settle the matter?" Pa said, "What do you usually pay?" But Ma had turned a bit awkward when she thought where her Albert had gone. She said, "No, someone's got to be summoned." So that was decided upon. They went straightway to the police station in front of the magistrate chap and told what had happened to Albert and proved it by showing his cap. The magistrate gave his opinion that no one was really to blame, and he said that he hoped the Ramsbottoms would have further sons to their name. At this, Ma got proper blazing. "And thank you, sir, kindly," said she. "What, spend all our lives breeding children to feed bloody lions? Not me."
I'll tell you an old-fashioned story that Grandfather used to relate about a joiner and building contractor. His name, it was Sam Oglethwaite. In a shop on the banks of the Irwell, old Sam used to follow his trade in a place you'll have heard of called Bury, you know, where black puddings is made. One day Sam was filling a knothole with putty when in through the door come an old fella, fair wreathered in whiskers. Tall chap said, "Good morning, I'm Noah." Well, Sam asked Noah what were his business, and Tall chap went on to remark that, not liking the look of the weather, he was thinking of building an ark. He'd gotten all the wood for the bulwarks and all t'other shipbuilding junk, but he wanted some nice bird's-eye maple to panel the side of his bunk. Now, maple was Sam's monopoly, which means it were all his to cut, and nobody else hadn't got none. So he asked Noah 3 halfpence a foot. "Halfpenny too much," replied Noah. "A penny a foot's more the mark. A penny a foot, and when rain comes, I'll give you a ride in me ark." But neither would budge in the bargain. The old daft thing was kind of a jam. So Sam stuck his tongue out at Noah, and Noah made rude noises at Sam. In wrath and ill feeling they parted, not knowing when they'd meet again, and Sam had forgot all about it. Till one day it started to rain. It rained and it rained for a fortnight and flooded the old countryside. It rained and it kept on raining till the Irwell was 50 miles wide. The houses were soon under water and folks to the roof had to climb, and they said 'twas the rottenest summer that Berry had had for some time. The rain showed no sign of abating. The water rose hour by hour, till only dry land were at Blackpool, and that was at top of the tower. So Sam started swimming to Blackpool. It took him best part of a week. His clothes were wet through when he got there, and his boots was beginning to leak. Sam stood up to his watch chain in water at tower top just before dark, when who should come sailing toward him but Noah steering his ark. They gazed at each other in silence till ark were alongside all but. Then Noah said, "What price your maple?" Sam answered, 3 halfpence a foot. Noah said, "Nay, I'll make thee an offer, same as I did t'other day. A penny a foot and a free ride. Now come on, lad, what does that say?" 3 halfpence a foot, came the answer. So Noah his sail had to hoist, and sailed off again in a dudgeon, while Sam stood determined, but moist. Noah cruised round, flying his pigeons, till 40th day of the wet, when on his way back, passing Blackpool, he saw old Sam standing there yet, his chin just stuck out above water. A comical figure he cut. Said Noah, "Now what's price of your maple?" Sam answered, 3 halfpence a foot. Said Noah, "You best take me offer. It's last time I'll be here about. And if water comes half an inch higher, I'll happen get maple for nowt." 3 halfpence a foot it'll cost you. And as for me, Sam said, "Don't fret. Sky's took a turn since this morning. I think it'll brighten up yet." PEGI 80.
PEGI 18. COVID-19. Do us a favour. Protect us old geezers. Wear a mask. You know it makes sense.
Hi there, Richard here, the voice of PEGI 18. You know, it occurred to me the other day that PEGI 18 is really quite well known almost throughout the world because it's been used on promotions for video games for the last 15 years, and you hear it on social media, on YouTube, on TV advertising. And I just wondered, you know, how many times I've been heard saying PEGI 18, as well as all the other PEGI 7, PEGI 12, etc. So do me a favor, if you have a moment, can you just send me a message saying who you are, where you live, how old you are, and how many times you think you've heard me say PEGI 18 in your life? That'd be doing me a big favor. Thanks very much.